around him. And it's, you know, it's not that he was throwing fits and kicking over C-stands and, you know, throwing boxes around or anything, but, you know, they gave him space. He was the Duke.
Right. Ron Howard might have the reputation of Hollywood's nice guy, but behind the camera and even on set, not everyone saw him that way. From his earliest days on the Andy Griffith Show to the heights of his directing career, Ron crossed paths with a few people he simply couldn't stand. What looked like family-friendly TV magic on the screen often masked some very real tension behind it. Even Andy Griffith himself carried grudges for years. But when it came to Ron, the moments of conflict were quieter, more personal. They weren't always explosive fights, but they left scars. And today we're diving into the actors Ron Howard reportedly disliked the most, the stories that shaped those tensions, and how they changed the course of his career. Let's start with the one fans always wonder about, Henry Winkler. In the golden haze of 1970s television, Happy Days looked like the perfect slice of Americana. Richie Cunningham, played by Ron Howard, was supposed to be the heart of the series, the all-American boy next door. But then came Henry Winkler as Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli, the leather-jacketed rebel with a motorcycle and an attitude. Audiences couldn't get enough of him, and that's where the trouble began. Almost overnight, Happy Days stopped being Richie's story and became the Fonz show. Writers shifted scripts, promotional posters suddenly revolved around Winkler, and network executives leaned hard into the Fonzie craze. For Ron, who had been promised the lead role, it was like watching the ground shift under his feet. Publicly, Howard played it cool. He praised Winkler, smiled for the cameras, and kept things professional. But behind the scenes, reports from the set suggested frustration. Insiders claim Ron confided he felt like a supporting character on his own show. Imagine building your career on being the central figure, only to be sidelined by someone who wasn't even supposed to be the star. Was there bitterness? Absolutely. Was it hatred? Not quite. Decades later, Howard has admitted there were tensions, though nothing explosive. Winkler, for his part, has always spoken warmly about Ron, even crediting him as a friend and collaborator. Ironically, it was Henry Winkler who later helped Ron make the jump from acting to directing by saying yes to his first big movie project, Night Shift. Without Winkler, Ron Howard's directing career may never have launched. So did Ron Howard truly hate Henry Winkler? Not in the long run, but there was a period where resentment simmered, jealousy lingered, and the shadow of Fonzie loomed large over Richie Cunningham. And that wouldn't be the last time Ron Howard clashed with a co-star. Next up is Shelley Long. In 1982, Ron Howard was taking his biggest gamble yet, directing Night Shift, a dark comedy about morgue workers who stumble into the business of running a prostitution ring. It starred Henry Winkler and a then-unknown Michael Keaton, whose improvisational genius lit up every scene. Ron was young, ambitious, and desperate for the production to go smoothly. But then came Shelley Long. Fresh off early TV work, she was cast as the female lead. On paper, she was perfect, smart, funny, and sharp. But once filming began, things got complicated. Unlike Keaton, who thrived on loose, unpredictable improvisation, Long demanded control. Every scene became a tug-of-war over tone and pacing. Crew members whispered that she was rigid, overly calculated, unwilling to bend. For Ron Howard, who valued collaboration and discovery on set, it was exhausting. Years later, he carefully avoided naming her, but his words painted the picture. Some actors come to set with their mind made up, and there's no room for play. That's hard when you're trying to discover something in the moment. Privately, though, insiders say he was more direct. One person recalled him muttering after a particularly tense shoot, "Shelley doesn't play with the team. She rewrites the rules every take." Howard may have kept his frustrations quiet in public, but the clash with Long showed something important about him. Even Hollywood's nice guy had limits, and when someone disrupted the balance he worked so hard to create, he didn't forget it. Night Shift should have been Ron Howard's triumph. His first studio film, his chance to prove that Opie wasn't just a child star, he was a director with a future. And on paper, the cast was perfect. Henry Winkler brought star power, Michael Keaton delivered wild, unpredictable brilliance, and Shelley Long seemed like the perfect balance. But harmony never came. Long wasn't disruptive in the loud, dramatic way that makes headlines. She was disruptive in quieter ways, by controlling every moment, second-guessing every instinct, and refusing to bend. Howard wanted freedom, collaboration, discovery in the moment. Long wanted structure, precision, and complete control. Crew members later described her as brilliant but rigid. Every scene turned into a tug-of-war, every rehearsal into an argument over tempo and tone. And for a 20-something director desperate to keep things smooth, it was a nightmare. Years later, Howard admitted that night shift taught him how to manage difficult personalities without letting one actor's energy poison the rest of the cast. Shelley never apologized. In her mind, she wasn't difficult at all. She was simply prepared. In one interview, she even brushed off the tension by saying, "He was nice but green. I didn't feel like he knew what he wanted." The irony? Night Shift worked. The movie was a sleeper hit. It launched Keaton into stardom, gave Winkler a rare leading role, and cemented Ron Howard as a director Hollywood could trust. But Shelley Long, she was gone. Howard never cast her again. Not once. When asked years later which actor taught him the most about patience, Howard only smiled and said, "Let's just say, my first studio film was an education. No name, no detail, but the silence was louder than any insult." Tom Sizemore. If Shelley Long taught Ron Howard about rigidity, Tom Sizemore taught him about chaos. And this time, the lesson nearly unraveled an entire film. It was 1996, and Howard was directing Ransom, a high-stakes thriller with Mel Gibson and Rene Russo. The studio expected a blockbuster. The cast was stacked. The pressure was sky-high. Enter Tom Sizemore. On screen, Sizemore was electric, gritty, dangerous, impossible to look away from. Off-screen, he was a storm. Drugs, alcohol, and volatility followed him everywhere, and the set of Ransom was no exception. He showed up late. He showed up unfocused. Some days, Howard had to recalibrate entire scenes just to work around him. The director who thrived on calm, order, and control suddenly found himself babysitting chaos. Howard never named him directly, but in a rare, candid moment, he admitted, "There were days I had to rebuild the rhythm of the set around one person's unpredictability." Everyone knew who he meant. Sizemore himself later confessed in his memoir. He admitted he was spiraling during Ransom, using drugs daily, and terrifying the people around him. "That set was clean, tight," he wrote. "I was the stain." Howard never attacked him publicly, but he never worked with him again. No second chances, no quiet reunion, no forgiveness. For a man who builds his films on trust, Tom Sizemore had broken the one rule that mattered most. And when Sizemore passed away in 2023, Ron Howard said nothing. Not a tribute, not a memory, not even a mention. Just silence. Andy Griffith. But not every tension in Ron Howard's life came from chaos or ego. Some came from heartbreak, because the man who first made him a star, the man he once called a second father, would become one of the most complicated figures in his life. On the Andy Griffith Show, young Ron was just 6 years old, playing America's favorite son, Opie Taylor. Griffith wasn't just his TV dad, he was his mentor, his protector, the man who taught him how to act, how to belong. "Andy made me feel like I was more than a child on set," Howard once said. "He treated me like a partner." But as the years passed, the warmth began to fade. Griffith grew moody, restless, and at times sharp. Castmates noticed. Frances Bavier, who played Aunt Bee, openly disliked him. Don Knotts adored him, but admitted he feared his temper. And Ron, he stayed quiet, but he felt it too. Behind the charm of Mayberry, the sheriff wasn't always smiling. And for young Ron Howard, the lessons of fatherhood and fame would come with a cost. But offset, things were different. The man Ron Howard had once idolized, Andy Griffith, began to feel unpredictable, at times even cold. For a young actor who grew up seeing Griffith as a second father, this shift was quietly devastating. Ron never lashed out, never aired dirty laundry in public, but if you listen carefully to some of his later interviews, the cracks start to show. In 1999, while promoting his film EDTV, Howard was asked about working with dominating personalities. He paused, smiled politely, and then said something that fans instantly recognized as a loaded statement. You learn early how to read the room, especially if you've worked with someone who can turn on the charm for a take, then shut it down between scenes. He never named names. He didn't have to. For those who knew the history, that sheriff's hat still cast a very long shadow. And yet Howard stayed respectful. In his 2006 memoir, Reflections, he admitted, Andy was complex. I admired him deeply, but I also learned how important it is to create consistency on a set, not just for the audience, but for the people who live in that world every day. It was as close as Ron ever came to admitting that the warmth fans saw on television didn't always match what happened when the camera stopped. Interestingly, Andy Griffith himself seemed to carry a quiet guilt about it. In a 1992 PBS interview, long after the Andy Griffith Show had ended, he said, "Ronnie was the best of us. He grew up right there in front of our eyes. I think I could have done more for him, but he didn't need me." Those who knew Griffith personally said he spoke of Howard with paternal pride, but also with regret, almost as if he knew the distance between them was his fault. When the series ended, there was no dramatic falling out, no bitter tabloid headlines, just silence. Ron and Andy rarely spoke again. They never collaborated, never appeared together at reunions, never tried to rekindle that early bond. Howard moved into film directing and built an empire. Griffith slipped into character roles in regional theater. By the time Andy passed away in 2012, the two hadn't been close for decades. Ron's tribute was respectful but careful. He said his pursuit of excellence and the joy he took in creating served generations and shaped my life. I'm forever grateful, R.I.P. Andy. It was heartfelt, but it wasn't personal. The subtext was clear, gratitude but also distance. And just when you think Howard's Hollywood challenges couldn't get heavier, along came Russell Crowe. On paper, their partnership looked like magic. In 2001, Ron Howard cast Russell in A Beautiful Mind. Howard was the calm, disciplined director. Crowe was the raw, fiery star. Together, they created a masterpiece that went on to win Best Picture. But behind the camera, it was a battle of opposites, a storm Howard barely contained. Crowe threw himself into the role of John Nash with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He questioned rewrites, argued about blocking, challenged camera placement. Every detail became a debate. An assistant director later admitted, Russell was brilliant, but he made everything harder than it had to be. Ron had to diffuse him constantly. Howard, the ultimate diplomat, never raised his voice. But later, in a rare moment of honesty, he told The Hollywood Reporter, "With some actors, you guide the scene. With Russell, you hang on." For Crowe, this wasn't conflict, it was art. He defended himself in interviews saying, "I don't show up to be liked. I show up to find the truth. If that ruffles feathers, so be it." Even when asked about Howard directly, his response was faint praise at best. "Ron's a good man, a thoughtful guy, but sometimes he wants things too clean. Art isn't clean." And that was the problem. Howard thrived on clean sets, collaborative energy, harmony. Crowe thrived on chaos, intensity, and confrontation. The two philosophies clashed every single day. They smiled together at award shows, but insiders knew the truth. This was a partnership that would never, ever be repeated. Howard, who often reuses actors he trusts, never cast Crowe again. Not in The Da Vinci Code, not in Frost Nixon, not in Rush. When pressed in 2015 about working with Crowe again, Howard offered a diplomatic but telling answer. "You never say never, but some collaborations are meant to be one-time moments." Translation: thank you for the Oscar, but never again. Since then, Crowe has kept quiet about Howard. No insults, no fond memories either. Just silence. As one crew member put it, they weren't enemies. They just weren't built for each other. So did Ron Howard hate Russell Crowe? Not in the emotional, screaming match sense, but in the practical, professional sense. The "I will never go through that again" sense. Absolutely. Crowe's chaos clashed with Howard's calm. The result was cinematic brilliance, but at a cost neither man was willing to pay twice. From Russell Crowe's intensity to Andy Griffith's moody authority, from Shelley Long's rigid control to Tom Sizemore's volatility, Ron Howard's career proves one thing. Even the calmest director in Hollywood has his breaking point. These actors pushed him to that edge. Which of these feuds shocked you the most? Was Howard too soft, or was he smart to walk away? Let me know in the comments below. And if you love uncovering the untold drama behind Hollywood's brightest stars, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive.